Hello and welcome to the National Black MBA Association's Wednesdays webinar series, and we thank you for joining us. Before I turn things over to our esteemed presenter, I'd like to take a moment to acquaint you with a few features of this web event technology. At any time, you may adjust your audio using any computer volume settings you may have. Over on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the Q&A window. To submit a question, type your question in the small text box at the bottom, and when finished, click the Send button. You may do this at any time during today's program. At this time, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker, Sunyin Chong. Sunyin is founding executive director of the Coach K Leadership and Ethics Center at Duke University School of Business. The center is a leadership laboratory with programming for all of Duke's daytime MBA students and convenes think tank gatherings across sectors to explore today's complex leadership challenges. Driven by the belief that today's complex challenges require collaboration across public, private, and social sectors, a theme throughout Sunyin's work is conveying interdisciplinary, diverse think tank gatherings towards defining complex problems and implementing new approaches for solving them. She received a BSE in biometrical engineering and an MBA from Duke, where she was an AB Duke scholar. She lives in Durham with the loves of her life, her husband Chad, and 3 children, Sophie, 9, Charlotte, 7, and Oliver, 5. So with no further ado, at this time, I will turn things over to our presenter to get things started.
Thank you so much for that kind and generous introduction. Hi, I'm Sunyin Chong, and I'm so honored and excited to be here and share with you some of the ideas that are drawn from my book, The Launch Book. I think to give context, in order to talk about why I think these ideas may be helpful and are important, is to share with you why I wrote The Launch Book. So a few years ago, I was realizing that no matter how many times I've launched something or how many times I've started something, every launch is a change from the status quo. And because we as human beings do not like change, I realized I was a scaredy cat with every new launch, no matter how many times I have launched. So whether it is writing a new article or going into a new step in my career, I wanted to figure out if the fear is never going to go away, how at least I can manage that fear. The fear, because we're human beings, so we don't like change, that fear is always going to be there, and that's okay. Fear is there for a reason. We just need processes for managing that fear. And so that's why I wrote the launch book. I wrote it for me. And in the process of writing this book, I discovered that everyone that I was interacting with, from my students all the way to the chief executives I was working with who are doing entrepreneurship launches all the time, that everyone had the same challenges. And so I wrote this book for them. And then the third reason why I wrote the book is because the advice that I shared, the stories that I shared in the book, have been collected over the last 10 to 15 years. I have been in my role at Duke. And so why should I be so selfish as to keep that wonderful advice to myself? Let me amplify the advice that others have so generously shared with me. And therefore, I wrote this book as a love song to all the wonderful people, from students to mentors, who have taken the time to invest in my success. And so that's why I wrote the launch book. So launch, some of the ideas around launch is that it is a change from the status quo. And from the moment we wake up to right now, which is 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, most of us have probably gone through at least 15 launch decisions, right? We're always, because it's about change. It's about change. And so I noticed that there were a lot of stuff out there when you want to change a new career. When you want to launch a new career, here's how you write a resume. When you want to launch a business, here's how you launch, here's how you pull together a business plan. And or you want to launch a home renovation, here's all the things that you need to know associated with contractors all the way to design and planning. But before we can address the tactics, I think we have to step back and look at what's the mindset associated with effective launching. And so I took all those ideas, from the launch book, and for this webinar, I reimagined them as launching our inner superhero. And so for today, we're going to go through some of the key concepts and habits around how do we launch our inner superhero, and in the process, build up the effective mindset that's needed for us to be able to launch anything. And so as a start, let me go to the next slide. Let me start off with two guiding philosophies that I have in terms of my role as a coach. And by the way, this webinar will interact as if we're in a informal coaching relationship. So don't be shy about asking questions. Engage. So one of the guiding principles I have in my life and in leadership is we are not yet who we shall become. And this is a quote by St. Augustine. And why I think this quote is so poignant is because if you are like me or like a lot of the executives whom I work with, you're most likely type A, perfectionists. And how often do we play the mistakes that we made over and over in our heads again? And that's living life looking in the rear view mirror, right? And so with this quote, it's wonderfully hopeful because it's saying we're not shackled by our past mistakes. We can't change the past. We can change the future. We're not yet who we shall become. So just because we have failed in the past doesn't mean we can't succeed in the future. Yeah. But it's also cautionary because it's about also that just because we've made good choices in the past doesn't mean that we can be any less vigilant about continuing to make good choices going forward. We cannot rest on our laurels. We are not yet whom we shall become. And the second guiding philosophy when I think about launches and leadership is this wonderful quote by the great Maya Angelou. I learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And the operative word here is feel. A lot of times in leadership, we focus on the only cognitive. We think just because we said something, or just because we put something in the data format, or we've explained what it is that we're trying to do, that people automatically will sign on to it, that there's going to be shared ownership in it. But unless we think about also, it's just as important for people. People should not only know something for it to be effective, they have to feel it. And so how we convey information in a way that maybe they can feel it is important. And then also how we engage with others. So if the first one is about how we evolve as a person in our lifelong journey, that we are not yet whom we shall become, this quote to me is also about our engagement with others. And I would argue that it's through the engagement with others that we grow the most. It's like when we learn a foreign language, that's when we get to know the language we know best even better. When we engage with others, that's how we come to know ourselves, and it's through that engagement with others in a way that's truly relational that we can actually create a more meaningful launch. Right? And there's something in the book that's about launch tribes, the importance of launch tribes. Basically, we never succeed alone, and we need each other. And so that's why between these two codes, I think it encapsulates a particular mindset that I think is necessary for success in leadership and in our personal launches. Now, today I did talk about launching our inner superhero. So most of us, when we think about superheroes, we think about this. You know, I will ask you, what are some of your favorite superheroes? And the people who come to mind would be Spider-Man, Black Panther, Wonder Woman, any of the people that's in our Marvel and DC Comics universe. However, when I think about superheroes, I think about this. Okay, well, not quite this. Today, by the way, is February 20th, and it's a day of the Duke UNC game, and if you were to see me in person, I'll be dressed in my Duke blues. But the point of this picture is that the real superheroes are each other. It's you. All of you who are here on this webinar and will be listening to this webinar later on, you are the superheroes. We have superheroes in all of us. And so how do we launch those? How do we, where the habits are effective in terms of being able to be the best superheroes that we can be for ourselves and for each other. So in the course of my career, I've had the privilege of working here at Duke University with CEOs, with military generals, with great champions. In this picture are Coach Mike Krzyzewski, the legendary basketball coach, General Marty Dempsey, who was the 18th chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Sim Sicken, who's another wonderful mentor of mine, who is a distinguished professor. And I have the privilege of working with everyone from exceptional students all the way to exceptional leaders. And so some of the ideas that I'm going to share today are drawn from patterns that I see in working with these remarkable leaders. So one of the things I want to start off with is talking about the idea of, we were talking about superheroes, then we have to talk about superpowers. Now, what's the difference between superpowers and strengths? Well, as an example, I could say I know how to do Excel spreadsheets. Excel spreadsheets is a strength. However, I am so not energized in doing Excel spreadsheets, and that's what makes it not a superpower. Superpowers are something that you're really, really great at, and that energizes you when you do it, and it probably comes naturally to you. And the paradox with superpowers is because it comes naturally to you, you tend to take it for granted. We tend to take it for granted. We don't recognize what our superpowers are, and we assume because it comes naturally to us that everyone else must have it too. And so we're terrible at understanding our own superpowers. However, we are really good at understanding what other people's superpowers are. And so in this, why are we talking about superpowers here? Well, one is in order to understand how we can be our best selves, to launch effectively and understand our purpose and our why, we have to understand what makes us different. And what makes us different is what makes us valuable. So if it's so hard for us to understand what our superpowers are, then how do we actually gain insight into that self, into that, understanding, how do we find out what our own superpowers are? Well, one of the action items is ask for behavioral feedback. And here's what I mean by that. We are always in the process. We know about the importance of getting and receiving feedback. However, there are very few times in our lives where we're taught how to give effective and receive effective feedback. And I had this insight on connecting behavioral feedback to superpowers a few years ago when one of my former students, we were meeting up, and she had just taken a new job. And she made one point. She said, I kept asking my boss for feedback, and she kept not giving me any feedback. I said, what do you mean? She said, I'll ask my boss, how am I doing on this job, and what can I do better? And the boss would say, you're doing a great job. And while that felt great for a second, she didn't feel like it was believable. And think back to all the times when all of us who are in this webinar right now, when someone gives you good feedback, like you're doing a great job, how often do you probe? How often do you find it believable? But then when someone says, hey, you can do better, suddenly we're all over that. We're asking, well, what is it that we could have done better? We're probing and asking for behaviorally focused feedback that let us know what we should stop doing. Well, why aren't we as diligent about asking for behaviorally positive feedback that lets us know what we should be replicating? So a way of getting at what our superpowers are is next time someone says, good job, that's nice feedback, but it's not effective because it doesn't give you any insight about what you should be doing more of, ask, well, thank you. First of all, I always say thank you when someone gives you feedback. Thank you. Can you help me understand? I'm not fishing for compliments. Can you help me understand what is it that I did that made it effective so I know I can replicate it? And in the process of getting that feedback, that's where you can get insight into what your superpowers are. There was a point in my career, so I know one of my superpowers is being a super connector. I love connecting people to make great things happen. For the longest time, as an introvert, I hated that moniker of being known as a connector because I equated connecting as something non-substantive. And it wasn't until I stopped and asked someone when they said, hey, Sunyin, you're a really good connector, that I asked, well, what was it that I did that made me a good connector? And they start talking about, well, you need to understand each person's backstories. You need to understand a little bit about the fields that they are in. And then you also have to connect the dots and understand how these two disparate things can integrate with each other. And after they were able to share that with me, did I realize what was it that I was doing that made me an effective connector, and not only that, that it was actually an invaluable differentiating skill that I shouldn't chuck, but I should actually double down on. So I urge you, I recommend for you, dive deep. Next time someone is giving you good feedback, dive deep into it just as diligently as if you would have diving into negative constructive feedback. At this point, are there any questions before I move on to the next superhero action 2? Okay. So the next thing I want to talk about, so think about that as superhero action 1, ask for behavioral feedback in order to understand what your superpowers are. Second thing is this idea of resilience and generosity. When you're launching into anything, you're going to be coming across both ups and downs. And this idea of dealing with failure, dealing with setbacks, there's a word that's out there that's really popular right now in leadership, that's resilience or grit. Now, here's the thing about resilience. I think a lot of our language around resilience is important and right, but it doesn't tell the whole story. Because so much of that resilience has been couched as if it's about individual grit. How much resilience do you as an individual have? And I think a lot of times what's missing is understanding that we are more resilient when we are in a community. We're more resilient when we have a team. And by the way, there's a connection. The most resilient people I know are also the most generous. And if we dive deep down into this, one thing I notice is the people who are resilient, when they're hit with a setback, that's when they double down on generosity. And when you think about why is that, well, generosity, when you start helping others, it gives you a sense of perspective, right? It gives you a sense of perspective. And so this idea of resilience, connecting to team, connecting to community, as an individual, if you're looking, I'll use myself as an example. On a scale from 1 to 10, my individual resiliency score is probably like a 4 out of 10. My motto is no pain, no pain. But I'm willing to go up against someone with an individual resiliency score that is 8 or 9 out of 10 because I know I've got a great community. And I know that I've made it a habit that when I'm down on my luck or when I'm facing great setbacks, even though the natural reaction is to crawl into the corner and be full of self-pity, there's a moment for that. Give it that moment. I also try to make it a habit of looking up and say, okay, who can I help at this moment? Because that's going to give me perspective. And that's also in the process going to build stronger teams. And so there's a quote by another one of my personal heroes, Mr. Rogers, where he talks about our jobs as human beings in life is to help others recognize their innate talent and what makes them special. and what makes them differentiating and unique. So I would say just if with the first superhero action, it's about asking for behavioral feedback to get insight into ourselves. With the second superhero action that connects to that, it is to catch others succeeding and to help others discover what their superpowers are. And that in itself is an act of generosity. So, and I think about one of my really great friends, Lisa Shallett. Lisa is a retired partner from Goldman Sachs who has been put in just interesting positions that other people, messy leadership positions that other people may not have the imaginations to know how to launch. And this is her perspective. Like, we have to create generous moments. And part of that generous moment is credentializing and encouraging and giving shout-out to each other's positive contributions. Now, when I think about the National Black MBA Association, I think about this awesome community that you all have. And I know there are wonderful relationships within this community. How can you spend the time to also credentialize each other, give each other a shout-out when someone does super well, when someone, startup, for example, is just got their first round of funding, when someone gets a promotion, can you be a part of cheering that person on, credentializing that person? I guarantee when you do that, it's going to make life so much more fun too. Okay, so then the next thing I want to talk about is this idea of knowing your origin story. And this was an interesting conversation with a colleague and friend of mine, Troy Campbell. Troy is a behavioral scientist, a psychologist who's with the University of Oregon, but he was previously at Duke University. And Troy and I were talking about the idea, he loves comic heroes too, and Troy and I were talking about the idea of destiny stories. That was one thing Troy was researching. He's like, if you think about it, whatever we're launching, there's always a customer. If we're launching into our next career, there's a customer. That's the people who are going to hire you in that next career. If you're launching a startup, it's the people who are going to purchase your goods and services. Those are your customers. If you're launching a home renovation, for example, it might be your family members and those who are going to reside in that home. So he said something interesting. He said, most of the time when we're launching, we're getting people to buy into our destiny stories, where we're going with this. And in order to get people to buy better into your destiny story, you have to know your origin story. And here's what we mean by origin stories. So a lot of times when we think about origin stories, we think chronologically. So look back at your resume when someone asks you, hey, when did you decide to be why did you decide to get your MBA? And you'll probably have a chronological answer. Well, you can say, well, I graduated at this point from this college, and then I went to work for this company, and it's very chronological, right? And when we look back, in keeping with the comic hero theme, let's talk about Spider-Man. When we think about Spider-Man's origin story, in that chronological terms, we would think, oh, it's the moment when he got bit by a spider. That's when he turned into Spider-Man, right? That's when he gained his superpowers. Well, chronologically, yes, but that's not really the type of origin story that we're talking about. The type of origin story that we're talking about is the type of origin story that reveals who you are and it reveals your why in life. It reveals your driving factors. So the real Spider-Man origin story is really at this point. So Spider-Man, he first got his powers. He was giddy with the power, and he had a chance to stop a villain, but he chose not to. And that villain, when he walked out the door, that villain hijacked a car that his beloved Uncle Ben was in, and in the process killed his Uncle Ben. And at that moment, Peter Parker truly became Spider-Man because they recognized with great power comes great responsibility, but there's also the desire to protect the people whom he loves. And that's really the superhero that we feel that's deeply compelling to us. It wasn't the superhero with the spider powers or spidey senses. It was really the superhero who was driven by the sense of responsibility and also the desire to protect his family and friends. And so when you think about the origin story for whatever it is you're thinking about launching, whether it's a new career, a new startup, or even something as it's monumental but not as career oriented as a home renovation, think about the why. Think about the why and be able to couch that why in a story. Now, the reason we use the word stories here is that data without context is meaningless. So let's go back to that Maya Angelou quote, this idea of feel. Data without context is meaningless. We as human beings are not programmed to consume data. Now, we're not wired that way. We're programmed and wired to consume stories. Stories is what makes things, ideas, data sticky. Stories is information put into a context that's emotionally resonant. So instead of telling a data of your resume when you're going into a career launch, talk about that moment that made you realize why you want to go into that new career. Talk about your why and how that connects with who you are as a person. How does it reveal who you are? And that is the idea of the origin story. So then next, I want to talk about this idea of vulnerability and power. With Brene Brown, she's brought in the word vulnerability and brave and connecting those. And vulnerability is something that the more I talk with different leaders and executives, the more I realize it's something that successful people struggle with. Is this idea of being vulnerable. We somehow, because of success, we think we have to double down on knowing all the answers or having all the answers all the time, that we can't show any vulnerability. We can't show any self-doubt. But I think with vulnerability, when we're vulnerable, strategically vulnerable, I'm not talking about airing one's dirty laundry, but being able to say, you know what, I don't know. I use this in coaching all the time. I would say, I don't know the answers. I can provide perspective, but we can figure out the answers together. I don't know, but we can figure it out. I don't know, but I can be a question in search of answers. That type of vulnerability enables others to invest in your success. We think about how in our careers, it's a joy to help others. But why is it when it comes time to ask for help of others, we get very, we shy away from that. Or we think, oh, I don't want to impose on that person. I don't want to ask for help. Or I don't even want to show I don't know something. Well, why are we being so selfish? Why are we not allowing others a chance to invest in our success when they've given us a chance to invest in their success? And so I hope one thing throughout this webinar is to rethink this idea of vulnerability. You look at this wonderful community that is the National Black MBA Association. You have so many amazing resources here in each other. People who have the answers to that question that you have. You might want to launch into a new business, but just don't even know where to begin or don't have a real grasp of the market or the industry that you're interested in launching into. All right, reach out to each other. Ask, and give others the chance to invest in your success. And so that would be the superhero action 4 that I would talk about. And then the last one that I like to talk about is this idea of team of superheroes. And this is a pattern that I'm seeing today. So growing up, our education system may be training us to be have multidimensional strengths, and that's wonderful. Fostering that sense of curiosity, learn, and continue to grow. That is great. However, if we work with the assumption that we have to constantly use that we have to deploy every single strength of ours. Actually, let me reword that. If we work thinking that we alone can succeed, then I think we're missing out on something. Because in today's world, things are so compressed. There's more demands on our time. There's more decisions to make in a shorter period of time. Even if you were great at 6 different things, there's not enough time in the day for you to exercise your greatness at all 6 of those things. The only way that we can truly succeed and scale today is by working with each other, by working in teams of superheroes. I started off this webinar mentioning that today is the Duke UNC game, and so I have basketball in my mind today. And when I think about basketball, it may be the person who takes the shot that gets the glory, who makes that dunk, but that person wouldn't be able to do that if it weren't for the other team members. And at the end of the day, no one remembers. Well, I guess you can have individual stats, but wouldn't it be better if you look at, are you on a winning team, right, rather than are you just a winning individual? So think about things in terms of teams. And that connects back to the vulnerability and power too. If we know that, okay, we can be good at everything, that's fine. We just have to know what our superpowers are. We have to know what each other's superpowers are. And if we team up, then that's when we have a team of superheroes. And that's when we can launch effectively, both in our personal lives and also in whatever endeavors that we are aspiring to launch. I believe very much in that, this idea of teams. It's a concept I can't emphasize enough, that we're moving towards teams rather than individuals. But in order to be in an effective team, it goes back to knowing what makes you valuable. You have to understand what your contributions to that team can be and have confidence in that. Okay? And in terms of teams, when on a team, when you have chemistry, when you are being generous with each other, and when you're credentializing each other, that's when having chemistry on the team is like having another superhero. And that chemistry goes back to this idea of what Maya Angelou had talked about, which is people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So if in the beginning, what makes you invaluable is what makes you different. There's that William Butler Yeats quote, talent perceives differences, but genius unity. This idea of teams, that's how it can really scale. And I want you to walk away with this Maya Angelou quote. So in summary, if we're going to look at the daily habits of superheroes, this is what I would talk about. One is, have you discovered something new about yourself today? Maybe discover something you didn't know how to do, something that you might have been brilliant at, or a different way of looking at your superpowers. Have you encouraged someone today? Have you been generous? Have you thanked someone on your team today? This is something that we think we're thanking people, but people are not mind readers. We actually have to say it out loud. So have we thanked someone on our team today? The fourth one is, did you do your best to be happy today? Happiness is a choice. It's like, what memories do you choose to remember? Do you choose to remember the good, or do you choose to remember only the bad? there's a wonderful John Lennon story. When John Lennon was little, his teacher asked him, as a class, what do you want to be when you grow up? And John Lennon's answer was, happy. At which his teacher said to him, I don't think you understand the question. Which he retorted back, I don't think you understand life. So this idea of happiness, or actually I would switch out happiness. Did you do your best to be fulfilled today, to lead a meaningful life today? And part of that meaningful life is discovering something about ourselves and also helping others. This idea of generosity and humility. The first thing is, have you made and captured a good memory? There's always, if you look for it, there's always a good memory, even in the worst of days. And you have the agency to make and create a good memory. You can create a good memory by credentializing someone. You can create a good memory by going outside and just soaking in the wonders of the universe, even if it's just for 5 minutes. And then capturing that good memory. We all have iPhones or smartphones. We can quickly click a picture of that moment. That's a good memory. And then the last thing is, in our world where it's such compressed time and increasing demand, just taking 5 minutes to do nothing. I learned this from General Marty Dempsey. When he became chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he knew his time would not be his own, and he would be scheduled to the minute. And so he knew also the importance of reflection. So he would actually schedule in blank space where there was no meetings, but it's just time for reflection. And that's what made him incredibly effective at his role. So when you're thinking like there's a to-do list that never seems to end, do take time, 5 minutes, just to do nothing and just to reboot, because that might actually be what enables you to move forward even more effectively on that to-do list. And with that, here's a way of staying in touch with me. I'm on LinkedIn, where I post a lot of 1-minute video interviews with different leaders as well as articles. I also have a Forbes blog where I wrote about capturing good memories. I also interview entrepreneurs and launchers. And I just recently launched on Instagram, where I hope to be able to share tips and ideas and also just happy pictures that make me happy and inspire me. So at this point, I'd like to open up for questions. I see Paul Alabi. Hi, Paul. You said, I like the idea of helping people, but asking people to help them out is tough, because sometimes people have been disappointing whenever you ask them for major help. And so therefore I've decided to stop asking for help and most times figure it out for myself. Do you think this is the right move? And also, what do you say, give others a chance to invest in our success? Does that make you look like you're depending on people to help you? Let me just address the last part first. We think that no matter how successful we are, if we look back, we've never really done it alone. Like, we've only been successful because of the generosity and help of others. If you look back, think about, it could be the foundation our parents have given us. It could be when we face a setback, there was that friend who reached out and gave us that encouraging words. So we never succeed alone. We've only been able to succeed by recognizing and by the help of others. So being that person for others is important. Allowing others, asking for help is, so therefore, like, instead of just making it serendipitous, let's be able to seek out help. Like saying, I don't have the answer to this question. Right now I'm thinking about launching something in executive education in a new domain, right? Let's call it, like, for example, venture capitalism. And I don't know very much about the finance ups and downs. So I'm going to reach out into my network and find out who I can ask for them to share their insights and their advice and gain a greater knowledge base to build on and consider explore this launch. Now, this idea of, when we ask for help, people have been disappointing. I would say step back and see what it is we're asking them for help on. People generally don't like to say no. People want to say yes, but it may be, is it the right ask, right? So if we're asking someone to give us a job, that's a pretty big ask, and there may be a whole host of other considerations there. But if we're asking them for advice and their insights, or asking them for how to move forward, how we ask, I think, is also important. There's a chapter in the book about seeking out mentors. And I think one of the things is not going to someone and saying, oh, do you know so-and-so? Can you connect me with that person? That's a very transactional ask. But if it's about, hey, share your advice. Do you have 5 minutes to share your advice? Or if you have built up a relationship with that person where you've already invested so much in their success, and you ask them, well, sometimes when there's that relationship, we don't even have to ask, and they're going to put us in touch with that person. But just let each person be able to help in the best way that they can, without judgment. Because some people are wonderful connectors, others may not be. It may be that the thing that you're asking for help on is the thing that comes naturally to you, so you help others out on that one particular thing very easily. But for others, it may not come as naturally. It might be another type of ask. And I hope that this is also able to, this helps answer your question. The other question from Paul is, how do you surround people with people who are like-minded and share the same values as you? I think it's important to also embrace different. The values part is important. Like, you want to surround yourself with people of integrity, people of good character. But this idea of like-minded, actually, I think it's important to surround ourselves also with people who might be contrarian to us, because we all have blind spots. And so to be able to, if someone says something that we think, completely disagrees with how we think about a particular approach, instead of saying I disagree, to be able to dive in and say, I'm curious, tell me more. And we might be able to learn something. We might be able to have our minds changed. Tracy, the question is, how do you realize the most valuable things you can give people to build a team with them? Tracy, that's a great question. It goes back to the ideas of superpowers. We're terrible at understanding what valuable things we bring to the table, but others are really good at being able to help us understand that. And so to be able to ask for that feedback, I think is important. And feedback, not just negative, constructive, but also positive, constructive. Be able to dive in and say, okay, so-and-so says you've done a great job. Well, help me understand what is it that you've done that led it to being a great job. And that's how, through that interaction with others, that's how you can recognize what are some of the most valuable things you can help others in building a team with them. Derek, this next question is from Derek Jones. How does one go about selecting a team of superheroes for lifelong collaboration with career and ventures? I think I go back to that idea of character and integrity being so important. When we surround ourselves with people of good values, integrity, and make that a norm in our life, then we're more likely to have more meaningful and successful launches. And so I think that will be the number one criteria in terms of identifying who to surround ourselves with is integrity and values. It's really easy to look at titles and positions or intellectual capital, but those things pale in comparison to values. In my life, I've seen enough how fortunes rise and fortunes fall, careers rise and careers fall, just by the natural pace of the marketplace, the uncertainty of the world we're living in. But I found that with people of good values, when they fall, people will rush to help them succeed again. And it's much more fun and much more meaningful to engage around values. So that's the number one criteria. And then you look for things that you're not, the other things you look, then with that criteria being satisfied, then you go in and you start noticing how you engage with the other person. So you think about there might be someone who thinks very differently than you, and they play a role where they are the contrarian. And through that dialogue, that's how you arrive at clarity, or you arrive at a new insight. And that would be a great person for your team. Another person might be, if you're a visionary, but you're terrible at execution, someone's superpowers might be execution, or vice versa. And so we have to get away from this idea that you have to be the person with the idea, the launch idea, in order to be valuable. Sometimes you can be the one who takes ideas from abstraction to reality, and that's what makes you incredibly valuable. And value those people too. Next question is from Rosalind Tadami, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing some of the names. So Rosalind asks, I like the idea of offering a person to share in your success. Is it okay to ask for a phone conversation or coffee of someone working a position you're seeking to gain insight to in a career endeavor? I think, as with anything, it depends on the context, and you know your context best. But I would say most people love to share advice, love to share insights. And so if you see someone that I wouldn't do it in a text. I would say that's more like a phone conversation. Just reach out, and the appropriate context. Reach out and say, you know what? Let me give an example of a career insight to a career endeavor. If I am interested in becoming a venture capitalist, I have very little background in that. I might reach out to someone who is a venture capitalist and say, I am interested in exploring this as a potential career path. Can you share with me how your career journey, and what do you think are the most valuable skills that enable you to be where you are? And if there's someone who knows you, to be able to say, what are the gaps I have in my skill set that I need to shore up, or what are some of the just basically gaps in my career that can help me be more effectively positioned for this new career path. So the next question is from Zonetta English. I work in an industry where there are a lot of risk-averse people. How do you engage leaders, such as managers, supervisors, C-level executives, to give behavioral feedback? So people may not always know how to give effective behavioral feedback, and so being able to ask and probe. So if, for example, with a particular leader, you are seeking more feedback, you might say, can you give me more insights into what is it that I could be doing better? And if they say nothing, they say there's nothing you could be doing better, you're doing great, say thank you. And then say, well, can you help me understand what is it that I'm doing well that I should keep on doing? And just by how you frame the question. Now, if they give you negative constructive feedback, you say what I can be doing better, and they suddenly have all these suggestions, you say the same two words, thank you. Because it takes courage for them to be that upfront. Our natural reaction is to be defensive, but treat this like a problem that you are solving. Dive in and say, okay, so what I'm hearing is I could be doing better on X, Y, and Z. Can you help me understand on this particular aspect, what are the behaviors associated? Or can you give me a specific example of what I've done that led you to have this perception? So that's a way of asking for behavioral feedback. There can be an entire webinar of giving and receiving feedback, but those are just a few starting examples. I see there are no more questions. This has been such a joy to be with you. Thank you for taking the time to join us on this webinar. This is how you stay in touch by LinkedIn. Reach out. I love to hear from you on Instagram, or go on my Forbes. You just type in Forbes and then Sunyin Shang, and you can see all my different blogs. And I'm putting out about 5 to 7 new blogs every month on just different how-tos, as well as insights, how-tos from leaders I'm interviewing. And then for a deeper dive into the ideas of launching, whether it's being you, building your launch tribe, imagining the possible, and Next Play, the launch book is available on Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, and Target.com. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me, and I'm excited to hear from you.
On behalf of MVMBAA, I'd like to thank our presenter for the great program, and thank you, our audience member, for your participation in today's event. This will conclude today's program. Thank you for attending, and have a nice day.